Kim, hey, how are you today?
Good, Carl, how are you?
Oh, I'm not too bad at all. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this functional assessment checklist. And we've identified through our referral process that Tracey Smith in year 4, she might have some problematic behaviour.
Yeah, that's definitely showing in her behaviour record.
Awesome. So hopefully when we go through here, we can start to create a hypothesis statement to put some plans into place to support Tracey. Before we get into the problematic behaviour, her academic strengths, what's something that she has there?
Science and art is Tracey's showing a great aptitude for in curriculum, and also is something she just enjoys doing. So definitely science and art for strengths.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. And what about social? Has she got anything socially that she's good at that you've noticed?
Yeah, really big into basketball, and she's demonstrated that she's really quite good at basketball. So socially, basketball's a big thing for Tracey.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go into a routine analysis and try and break this down. Now, obviously, you're going to have a really good feel on how she goes with most subjects because you have her all day. But things like PE and art, we can also have a look at as well.
Yeah.
So on a typical day, what's the first sort of thing that we do in class?
So at about 9 o'clock, we come in and do reading.
Yep.
First thing in the morning.
And now what I'm going to do, and this is probably an important part, we look at the likelihood of the problem behavior occurring. So if we say a 1, it means it's very, very unlikely or probably has never happened. And if we say a 6, it's happening every single session and it's quite a high frequency of behaviors to occur. So when we talk about reading at 9 o'clock, what number would you give that?
I'd probably give reading a 1. It's pretty unlikely for it to happen during reading.
Awesome, thank you. And after reading, what's another routine that we engage with?
So after reading at about 9:30, we have our snack break, and that's pretty consistent for Tracey each day.
Yeah, so what number would we give that?
Probably a 4 for snack break.
Yeah, okay. And because it is quite high, we'll want to tease that behavior out a little bit. So specifically, and remember we've talked about the observable and measurable, what types of behavior would she be demonstrating?
So the ones we see most commonly are the calling names to other students and making threats.
Yeah. Now, what do we do when she calls names and makes threats?
Generally, the consequence for that is a detention.
Awesome. Alrighty, so after the break at 9:30, what's another routine that we generally engage in?
At 10 o'clock, we start our writing.
Yep. And with writing, a 1 to a 6, where would we see Tracey?
A 1.
Yeah. Okay, and after writing, generally?
At 10:30, we do maths. And maths is probably a 1 as well. It's not very likely for that to happen during maths.
Yeah, okay. So with reading, writing and math, we're seeing very low likelihood of behaviour, but it's the break time. Is there, what else will we engage with?
So at 11 o'clock, the students will go out to lunch.
Yep. And how is she generally at lunchtime?
I'd give lunch a 5. It's pretty consistent. It doesn't happen every single time, so I wouldn't give it a 6, but definitely a 5.
Perfect. And because it is so high, again, let's try and tease out what happens at those lunchtimes.
Yep, so when Tracey is with her group of friends, if other kids come towards her that she doesn't think are quite as popular or as cool as her, she'll start calling them names and making those threats.
Yeah. Excellent. So what tends to happen, and I know that you aren't on duty every time, but what's the data that you've collected to start to say around what happens after that?
Yeah, so the data's showing pretty clearly that the most common response to that is a detention.
Yeah. Excellent. Is there any other routines that we want to look at?
11:30, most days we do social studies, but it's a 1. It's very low.
Yeah. Awesome. And because they are so low, we're not going to try and tease it out. Even if it was a 1, a 2, or maybe even a 3, we're probably not going to tease it out. What we want to try and really do here is focus on the main problematic behaviours and try and reduce those first. Yeah. Is there any other subjects?
PE and arts are a 1. Science, which is normally at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, is also a 1. But if we look at when the after school bell goes at 3 and she moves out of the classroom, we're probably back up to about a 3.
Okay. So back up to a 3. Now, because we've already got a 4 and a 5, we're not going to tease the after-school bell out yet. What we're trying to do here is to hone in a little bit more on this break time and this lunchtime to identify what it is that we can put in place to try and support Tracey. Alrighty, so routine 1, because it's a 5, we're going to put lunchtime.
Yep.
And the problematic behavior again is that calling unpopular kids' names, you said.
Anyone she thinks isn't as popular as her and her group of friends.
Yeah. And who's her group of friends that she usually hangs out with?
Generally, it's Johnny and Karen.
Yeah. And I'm also going to populate routine 2 here is going to be the break time, which is your eating and snack break, where she, again, is calling students' names.
And calling names, making those threats of harm, just those.
Yeah. Now, if we have a look over at the sheet, we've then got behaviors. So we've started to identify the routines these happen in. Let's start to have a look at the behavior. So what we want to do is just work out 2, the big priorities. So 1 being the most problematic and 2 being the next problematic. So do we think it's about late, fighting? We've got disruptive, theft, unresponsive, inappropriate language, and all of those. So I'll give you about 30 seconds just to have a look. And what do you think the biggest problematic behavior is going to be?
Well, the one that stands out to me straight away is verbal harassment.
Yep.
Because teasing is involved almost every time.
Awesome. So we'll put a 1 down for that.
And then it's not on here, but I'd probably add under other the threats, because she does follow up that teasing with those threats of harm.
We'll put that in there. And again, that's what the data's saying as well on the one score records. Yeah, so let's describe the prioritized problem in observable terms. So how can we put her behavior in observable and measurable terms so everyone else can see that? What do we think?
Yep, so when Tracey is near unpopular students with her group of friends, she will call them names and make threats of harm.
All right. So what is the frequency of this problem behavior? So how many times a day will she generally engage in this type of behavior?
Probably about 2 or 3 times a day.
Yep.
But it aligns with those breaks. That's what the data's telling us.
Okay, cool. So the 2 breaks. So we'll populate a 2 there. Now, what is the duration of these events occurring?
It depends on the day, but generally about 30 seconds to a few minutes before she has a response or gets a consequence.
Yep. Okay. Now, is this behaviour immediate danger to yourself or others?
No.
Okay, so now we've started to look at part A of the fact sheet, which is determining Tracey's strengths as well as the routines and the behaviour we're starting to see. We always look at the behaviour first when identifying the ABC. The next thing that we really need to look at is the antecedents. Yes. Okay, but before we get there, the routines we've readily identified as lunchtime.
Yes.
And again, the problematic behaviour is she's calling unpopular students' names, or students she perceives as unpopular. Alrighty. Now, let's have a look at these antecedents. We're going to do the same ranking system. So we're going to give 1 being the most likely that we think it's occurring. And we're going to give it 2 as the next most likely that we think is going to happen. And it's really important to remember here, this is just a hypothesis at the moment. So we can put things in place and then measure whether or not we've had impact. So I'll give you about 10 seconds just to have a look over the environmental features and what we think the antecedents might be.
Can definitely move away from the curriculum-based ones because she does quite well in curriculum, but it's that unstructured time and her transitions that are probably the biggest environmental features.
Perfect.
And that's very evident in our one school data when we have a look.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Kim. Now, what we do here is because we've got a J or a K, we follow up the questions and go that little bit deeper. So describe the setting that we think is actually happening.
So Tracey will move into that unstructured time, will be with her friends, and she'll be approached by those students she perceives to be unpopular.
Okay. So, When she's approached by unpopular, well, student she perceives as unpopular. Okay, so now the consequence. Now, remember we've talked about this consequence isn't what we put in place, but what happens directly after the behavior. So far I'm starting to get a picture. When she's at lunchtime in unstructured environment, she's going to call unpopular kids' names if they start to approach her.
Yeah.
What happens directly after that, do we think? So we're going to have a look at this consequence function.
Yeah.
Again, we'll do the scale, 1 being the worst and 2 being the next likely. So what do we think she's trying to get from this, or what happens directly after?
So directly after she does that, Johnny and Karen will start laughing, and that sort of encourages her to do more. So getting that peer attention would be number 1.
Yep.
And she's also trying to avoid peer attention by looking cool and not wanting them to sort of dismiss her and think of her as one of those perceived unpopular kids.
Awesome. So we really do think that it's number 1, getting the peer attention, but we'll put that down as a second option as well. Now again, because we've got an A or a B, whose attention do we think she's trying to get? What happens directly after?
Johnny and Karen, because they're laughing, encouraging her.
Yeah. So the perceived popular kids will laugh. Excellent. Now, let's have a look at setting events. Now, when we talk about setting events, they're events that might temporarily happen that set up the behavior to make it more likely to occur. So, an example of that might be forgetting to take your medication if we have something like ADHD. It might be that we've got a conflict at home, or if we catch the bus on some of those days. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds just to have a look at some of these setting events. And what ones, if we know any, do we think might increase the likelihood of the behavior?
I don't think there are any setting events that are making the behavior worse specifically. It's just that routine of being in the break and moving to that unstructured time.
Excellent, thank you. And what we're going to do now is I'm just going to create a summary of the behavior based on the sheet that we've, the information that we've collected so far. So again, the routine is going to be at lunchtime when Tracey is approached by who she perceives as unpopular kids. Now, from that, the behavior that we think is going to occur from there, she's going to call these students names, tease them, and even make threats as well. So, call students names. And make threats. Now, what happens directly after she's made those threats is that we're saying Johnny and Karen are actually going to laugh. So she's what we can hypothesize is that we think she is trying to get peer attention.
Correct, yes.
Now, when we have a look at this scale down the bottom, we still use the 1 to 6 scale. A 1 is you're still not quite sure if we've hit the mark. A 6 is you're 100% sure there's no doubts that we've captured it. How do you think this is? So again, the summary of behavior is Tracey's going to call students names and make threats to these unpopular kids if they approach her at a lunchtime. And as a result, the more popular kids, Johnny and Karen, are then going to laugh. So we think she's trying to get their attention. How likely do you think we are?
I think we're sitting at a 5. I'm pretty sure we're on the mark, and the data seems to support that, but definitely a 5.
Yeah, excellent. And again, I appreciate the time that you've taken to help me get a clearer picture. And the next steps from here is we're going to try and put some supports in place and then measure whether or not we've had any impact. Okay, and remember, this is just a hypothesis. So if we've got it right, we should see a reduction in behavior. But if we've got it wrong, we can always come back and reanalyze this fact sheet.
Excellent, I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.